Hello and welcome to our UJ Convocation Conversations around Graduate Employability. A warm welcome to our members of MEC, to our speakers, to the President of our Convocation, Prof. Diale, to the UJ staff, and most importantly, to you, our wonderful UJ alumni. Our speakers have a range of experience in marketing, banking, and engineering. They are all UJ alumni who have been changing the world in a whole variety of different ways. Our speakers will be sharing their ideas and expertise, after which there'll be a chance for questions and answers. So we encourage you to begin to post your questions as soon as you have a question. There is a chat function, and please use that chat function. At the end of the 4 presentations, we will have a time for questions and answers, and we will attend to all your questions. Our first speaker today is Dr. Denise Webstock. She is the Senior Director of our Institutional Planning, Evaluation and Monitoring Division. Her presentation gives an overview of the current global and national employability of graduates, with a particular focus on our UJ graduates. Our second speaker is the Deputy President of our Convocation, Ms. Zanele Modiba. She is the Director of The Alternative, and her presentation will focus on graduate employability in the marketing and advertising sector. Our third speaker is Mr. Msizi Khoza. He is a UJ Council representative and member of the Executive Committee. He is the Director of Investment Banking Division at ABSA, and he will be discussing graduate employability in the banking sector. Our third speaker today is Ms. Confidence Diale, and she is also a member of our Convocation, and she is a professional engineer, and she will be talking about graduate employability in the engineering sector. At the end of the presentations from our speakers, there will be an opportunity for questions and answers. The questions and answers will be facilitated by Prof. Diale, who is the head of educational psychology at UJ University. My name is Maria Frahm-Arp, and I am the Executive Director of the Library here at UJ and an Associate Professor in the Faculty of Humanities. I want to welcome you all very warmly once again, and I look forward to sharing this time with you. We're going to move now to the first of our speakers, and I will be giving you a little bit more information about our first speaker. Dr. Denise Webstock, as I said, is the Senior Director of the UJ Institute for Planning and Evaluation and Monitoring. She is responsible for monitoring and planning and our UJ strategies. She oversees how these strategies are working out, what strategies need to be changed, and helps us to see how to move the university forward. A big part of her job is to look closely at trends, particularly trends in the world of universities. And so she has a lot of expertise in looking at both the global and national trends around graduate employability. Denise, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule and for being with us today. We look forward to learning from you. And over to you, Denise.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Maria. So as you said, and afternoon, everybody, I'm really pleased to be with you. As a Senior Director in Institutional Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, part of our job is to find out what is happening, both with the university performance and how our students are thinking and feeling, and where they're being employed is also part of it. So I've been asked to share with you some of the global, national and UJ trends arising from some of our work on this. And I think it's quite instructive possibly to start with by predicating the discussion of employability by saying, what do we mean by that? How we understand employability depends very much on how we understand the role of universities. And it's become an increasingly important question to ask, what are universities for? And some of that will become clear as I go through the presentation. There are many complex debates about the purpose of a university and what is the link between graduate skills, unemployment, education. Now, there's a wonderful book that came out in 2017 by Walker and Fonkwa, and they make an argument, which I shan't go into in too much depth, that we shouldn't think of education too narrowly and employability either. And they see education very much as a broad subject in the context of a developing knowledge economy. But they point to three tensions in the debates, which I think are quite instructive for us. So part of how we understand employability depends on whether you see education as utilitarian, I go to university to get a job, or ideological, I go to university to get educated far more broadly. And this, of course, relates also to what we teach. So how broad is our curriculum? What kinds of things do we want to inculcate in our students? Is it attitudes, values, as well as particular skills? Or are we, to some extent, dictated to by the demands of professional bodies, say, who are wanting very specific skills to be included in curriculum? And then also there's the debate between what is education for? Is it for my private benefit? Is it for me to go out there, earn a job and get some money, high earnings? We'll see a lot about high earnings later on. Or is it a societal benefit? Is it a public good? So that there is some debate and discussion at a national level on how we steer education towards particular goals, for instance. So impact, social development, and so on. But having said that, I think, and I personally don't subscribe to a utilitarian notion of education, but I do think it's very, very important for universities to be monitoring employability, particularly in contexts where unemployment generally is quite high. So just a few words about some international trends. Some years back, and I'm talking maybe a decade or so, graduate unemployment was already an issue in many countries in the world. We saw that, say, in 2008, graduate unemployability was quite high in Europe, then it's got a little bit better. In 2019, we're talking 80.9% of recent graduates getting employed, which sounds good. But then you think on the flip side, that's 20% that are not getting employed, which is worrying. More recently, and I refer here to the study that you see on the right there was a study done by an Institute of Student Employers in 21 countries in July 2020. And what they found was that youth unemployment in general is on the rise, and it's not showing so much in the graduate employment figures yet, but they are seeing that graduate recruitment actually is down everywhere, and it will show up in the figures shortly. Interestingly, of the 21 countries, they had a table, and in that table there were 4 countries that they said would be more or less the same, and they counted South Africa among those. So that's the good news there. I think it's fairly obvious to say that graduate employment, the graduate employment market mirrors the economy. So obviously in a more difficult economy, it's going to be more difficult to get jobs, and I think that we are starting to see that. And I think even before last year, we started to see graduate recruitment going online more, and now obviously that has become the norm. One of the consequences of the difficult graduate market is that we are seeing, particularly in Europe and elsewhere, students saying, well, I'm just going to carry on studying then until the market gets better. So that tends to influence postgraduates and their studies and so on. And yes, I mentioned that we're seeing concerns about recruitment. There's one particular recruiting agency called Milk Round in the UK, and they said last year they were seeing only 18% of their graduates actually getting jobs, where ordinarily they would have expected around 60%. And even more concerning because of the market starting to get lower pay. That's a worry. Just more broadly, a backdrop to some of the international trends. You know that for the last couple of decades, we've been through the massification of higher education, governments wanting more accountability and focus on employability, but many more people coming through higher education. And one of the big shifts has been, if you look at curriculum and the way the curricula are put together, far more focus on graduate outcomes, whereas it used to be very much more about input in the past. So now it's more about outcomes, and a further shift to now focusing not just on the outcomes, but how do you transition out of university. So we also see in a higher education policy report in 2020, we see employability coming more into the mainstream of what universities are busy with. So where we used to see careers guidance somewhere on the side, this is becoming far more a mainstream function of universities, but it doesn't always carry the resources that are required. And also we had recently at our executive leadership group a talk by Professor Chris Brink, some of you will know, who also mentioned about the shift from inputs to not just outcomes, but impact. So coming back to the question of what universities are for, how are universities making a difference? How are the graduates also making a difference out there? How are they solving real world problems? Now, there are a number of predictors that we can look at in terms of international trends. One is that because of the economy, etc., that we will see greater emphasis on entrepreneurial aspects. And here's just an arbitrary comment, actually, from somebody in Indonesia, but I think it says a lot. He says, I engage in various student discussions about what to do in this COVID pandemic. And we came to the common conclusion, try not to become job seekers, instead be job creators. It's a big push for us to become a more independent generation. And I think that that's interesting, and you'll see echoes of that further on. The other thing that we're seeing is that over the past couple of decades, so many jobs have required a degree, and more degrees and higher degrees and so on, which we might call degree inflation, but that is starting to be challenged. So we're starting to see employers saying, why do I need a degree for this person to do this job? I want them to be able to do stuff, and this piece of paper doesn't necessarily tell me that they can do stuff. So I want to see the experience, and we're starting to see a shift towards presenting yourself with portfolios, virtual portfolios as well, to show what you can do rather than just your piece of paper. But it also means the flip side of that is, of course, that if employers are not employing people with degrees, they can offer less money for the same job. Then there's another aspect. We know that in the Sustainable Development Goals, number 8, from the UN, that is about securing decent work. And we're very far from that across the world. There are some 200 million students, but they're not all getting decent work. So it's also about the quality of work that you do. And we're starting to see many more multilateral organizations putting efforts into plans and programs to try to realize that, but we're far from that. More predictors, seeing more mainstreaming career counseling. Marguerite Denise has had quite a reputation in getting her predictions right. So she is saying that we're going to see career counseling extending from before you start university to graduating and further. And also an interesting one that we will see university transcripts not only having your subjects, but also the competencies that you've earned listed on your actual transcript. And then as another one is that part of the impact movement is connecting employability and social change. So we're seeing many NGOs and international organizations talking to developing programs to help universities and students to connect their employability and social change. And I've given an example of one of those here, which you could read. This particular slide comes from a Universum survey, more of that later. And I can't go into all of it because I have a lot more that I want to cover. But they picked up from students that they've surveyed in many countries, what are their main issues. So you will see in some of them it's about we want to earn a lot, in others it's we want to have an appropriate work-life balance. Interestingly, the one on South Africa, bottom left, says business and engineering students in South Africa have entrepreneurship and ability to be creative and innovative as their most important career goals. And I found that quite interesting. Whereas it's very different, so for example, in China where they're wanting a secure job. Now coming to some national trends, we know that overall unemployment is around the 30% mark, depending on the quarter that you're looking at. For some time in South Africa, there's been a debate about whether graduate unemployment was in a crisis or not. And that came largely from an HSRC survey that used to be run some time back, where many people who were unemployed actually responded. So they had a very high graduate unemployment rate, which kind of skewed perceptions. They were saying it was in the area of 30%. It wasn't really. So there were other studies that were done that saw that it was about 5.9%, which compared well with Europe at the time, which was 6.2%. But what we do see in the quarterly labour force survey, that it has been increasing. So in 2011, we would have been talking about 4.3%, and now it's more about 9%. And if you look at the number of unemployed people in South Africa, currently 2.1% are graduates. That doesn't sound like a lot until you translate it into people, and we're talking in the order of 150,000 people there, which is very worrying. Now, I'm going to skip over this quite quickly because I know my time is short, but just to say that there have been a number of surveys. What we learned from the one in the Western Cape was a very interesting concept. So they found of the 4 institutions in the Western Cape that graduate unemployment was obviously quite high straight after graduating and tapered off thereafter. So they had this concept of frictional unemployment. It's not real unemployment. It's at that moment, which I think is useful when we look at our own data. There are others. There's a labour market intelligence partnership. And all of these point to the need for a national tracer study, which does not exist at the moment, although there are discussions within USAF for such a tracer study to be coordinated by a group of people from Rhodes. But these are very expensive, labour intensive. And if you're going to set them up, then, you know, they must carry on for some years. So we'll have to see. Now, there's just a slide which gives you a picture of UJ and numbers. So you will see these are at the top of 2020 figures. So we have a head count of some 48,000 students. And I'm just going to pick on 1 or 2 of those numbers that I think are interesting. So in 2019, we graduated from our undergraduate courses, some 10,000 students and some 3,500 postgrads. I have to say that we have been doing really well with our success rates. So you will see 86%. In 2020, we have gone up incredibly by 3.5%. So last year being what it was, that is quite amazing. But you see, that's how many people we are putting out into the job markets each year. So what does UJ do about graduate employability? We have the PsycAD Career Centre. They do an annual talent survey with Universum, which I'll show you a few slides of shortly. It's a very sophisticated report, and it looks at what our current students think about in relation to careers, what attributes are important, and so on, and what their aspirations are, and it compares that with competitor institutions. There are also independent surveys like the South African Graduate Employers Association. I'll mention that briefly just now. And then DAPEM, that's the unit that we're talking about that I'm from at UJ. And we've been doing annual employability surveys since 2014. And we also do experience surveys. We ask students in those, what is it that you're planning to do? And many of them the majority of them want to study further. I was just saying earlier, it used to be that they all wanted to work for government. Now they're starting to say, no, we want to work for private sector. Big shift there. So the Universum one here is just the cover of theirs, and it looks at South African students and compares UJ's responses with others. You will see here's their first slide, and so it has 3,000 responses, roughly. And I picked out two things from it. One is they do a word cloud of what our institutions, our students think about the UJ. That's very interesting when you see the words there of challenging, hard work, innovation, etc. One thing you'll see that's very different from other institutions is Fourth Industrial Revolution. Mm-hmm. It's there. The thing that concerned me in this particular survey, if you look at what students expect to earn, if you look at the column on the left, these are UJ students. And you compare it with competitor schools. I wonder why they expect to earn less. Oh, 5 minutes, I've got so much to say. Mm-hmm. I will try to get through it. And you will see that there is a huge gender gap in expectations. Now that's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're already thinking like that as a student, that's a worry. Plans after graduation, this is too small to see in any event, but the point there is 82% of them want to carry on studying. Now getting to DAPEM and what we do, that's a collage of some of the things we get involved in and some of the reports. And I'll take you very quickly through our employability survey. So we've been doing these, as I said, since 2014, and we survey the last 3 cohorts of graduates, so those who in a particular year and the 2 years before. What you can see, and this is very busy, but I want you to see just the total at the bottom. Since 2016, how many have responded to the surveys? In 2020, we had far more because we included postgraduates for the first time. So we're looking at roughly around 3,000 responses. This is a concerning one. You will see here the graph of employed and unemployed. The surveys are showing that our students are thinking more about, as I said, entrepreneurial opportunities, but the unemployment is a concern. So we also see that we're looking at employment within 3 months per qualification type. I'm going to go through this very quickly because I'm running out of time. I think the one that concerns me there is the 4-year degree. Usually that's a dead cert for employment, and we're starting to see that coming down over the last couple of years, and that is a bit of a worry. We looked at postgraduates. This is whether they got a job in 3 months. So ordinarily, it's around 70%. We asked them, would you have been able to get your current job without your qualification? The answer is overwhelmingly no. They needed that qualification, or the qualification did get them an advantage. Interestingly, there are just under 10% who are saying, no, I didn't actually need that qualification for the job that I'm doing. Then we asked them, how did your studies prepare you for your working life? How well? And the answer there is overwhelmingly positive. You will see that there are very few, actually around 15%, who are saying didn't really prepare me in the way that I thought it should. Something we often get asked is, do our students work in the same industry in which they studied? And yes, the answer is that. Now this one I think you will find quite interesting. So we also asked them about how did COVID affect your prospects of employment? And the large majority of them said it had. And I have a couple of quotes here which you can read in the presentation that you have. For example, if it weren't for lockdown, by now I would be employed. because I got a call for an interview 4 days before lockdown occurred, and then it happened, and then I didn't get a job. So there are many of the stories like that in our qualitative information. As a summary, I've said some of those things. Again, it's about COVID influencing the employment prospects. But I think one of the most important things we learned from the surveys, we did some research into what were the predictors of employability, and it was whether they had a job at university. If they had a job at university, they were far more likely to be employed thereafter. And I think that was one of our important learnings. I'm going to skip through those because they have so much information. What we also did in our 2019 survey is we also looked at what some of the top employers said. So what are your main difficulties? And almost half of them were saying our difficulty was a shortage of applicants with the right skills and capabilities. And that, matching that with an graduate unemployment problem is something that we need to think about in terms of curriculum. We also then put forward some ideas about how we could get alumni involved with the graduate employment question. There are some ideas here, but I want to skip forward to from all those ideas to tell you what UJ actually does. So the career services at UJ in 2020 reached some 18,000 students in an online work readiness program. They collaborated with the South African Graduate Employers Association, virtual careers fairs, Instagram lounge chats, coffee sessions, in conversations virtually with graduates, and 26 events on social media. You'll see there's a tweet there, they monitor all the tweets, etc. But I think what I would like to end with, Maria, I'm nearly there, is to show you what the external survey found about our career services. And a quick squiz down that left-hand column will show you that on every aspect that they measured, UJ was higher than the industry average, and so that's encouraging. And what I finally want to mention is that our career services have put together an app, which I think is really very useful. They launched it in August last year. So you will see there's a student way to log into the app and an employer way to log into the app to connect the students and the employers, which I think is a wonderful innovation. And there it's downloadable of the app, and you can find all of their various information on that particular website address as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Denise. That was wonderful and so rich with information and so interesting. One of the things that I definitely took away from it was the importance of entrepreneurship and the role of entrepreneurship in our current world. And so it is with great pleasure that I introduce our next speaker, Zanele Modiba, who is herself an entrepreneur. She has a postgraduate degree and received her first degree here at UJ in corporate communication. She is a personal development speaker, a marketing specialist, and the managing director of her own business called The Alternative. She is the creator and founder of the pioneering Kingdom board game, which sounds absolutely fascinating. It's a board game that is themed on Africa and promotes knowledge from Africa, all its different countries and practices. Zanele, thank you so much for being with us today, and we really look forward to your presentation. Over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm Zanele Modiba, and I'm thrilled that you were able to join us today. I'm going to go right in. I'm speaking about graduates' employability as it relates to marketing and the advertising industry. So for those of you who don't know what marketing and advertising is briefly, marketing really refers to the activities that a company undertakes to promote the buying of and selling of products and services and goods. Essentially, it really is about how do you align the idea and the products and services with the target market. Whereas advertising is really about the tactic. It's literally the process of making the product and services known to the audience. And that's essentially what that's about. the South African advertising industry is huge. It literally is a 30 billion rand industry, and it cuts across all channels: TV, radio, print, digital, new media, online. It's everything that is included in the industry. And interestingly enough, for the first time in 2023, we will have online mobile media really overtaking the TV and radio media. And that obviously tells us that we are digitizing also in the advertising and marketing space. I want to talk to you now about actually the glaring gap of the graduate unemployment numbers. I think Prof. Webbstock spoke about the controversy about what numbers you choose. And so in this instance, I want to talk to Stats SA, referring to their 2019 survey, saying that unemployment for graduates, recent graduates who are 24 years old or not above 24 years old, they're 31% in South Africa. So I think it's important to know that it doesn't speak about all the graduate unemployment, which I think is a 2.1% number that Prof was speaking about, but really 31% of all our graduates that are under 24 years old are unemployed. That is for me shocking, and it's an increase of 11% if you compare it quarter on quarter from 2019 in the same period. I think that shows us that there's something wrong in the market. I mean, of course, we know that our economy is struggling, and of course, our unemployment will match our economy, as Prof says, but I do think that number is still huge, considering that the higher education management system tells us, information system tells us, that we produce about 190,000 graduates and only have placement or absorb 41,000 of those graduates each year. That for me is shocking. It means we've got a lot of talented individuals sitting at home, looking for jobs, really trying to get into this market. And it surprises me because the marketing and advertising industry, being so vast and being so literally pervasive in every single corporate that you can find, means there's something, there's a gap there. And what is this gap? And I really want to talk about that gap. So before we talk about the gap and how we can help these graduates, what are employers saying about who the model graduate is? And I want to reference Kathy Sims, who's the Executive Director of the South African Graduate Employees Association, who notes that employers are looking for graduates who are critical thinkers, who demonstrate creativity, can communicate effectively, and can collaborate in delivering the challenges of the organization. Not once does she mention some form of academic qualification or level or rank in academics. She does say that adaptability and agility skills are valued. Your degree is a base. Your degree is the beginning. It is not the end. And so what's more important that she elaborates on is that you got to have people who are focused on innovation. Innovation came through strongly as well. And this includes innovation, not just as a thinker, but actually innovation in marketing. So gone are the time where you were just a corporate communicator, or you're just a brand specialist, or you're just, a media buyer. You really have to be a Jill of all trades and a master of one. And really, if your marketing means you have to focus on online, offline branding, direct marketing, and know a little bit about everything, which is obviously quite challenging because you've just come out of this degree, that's a specialist degree, and now you have to know everything across the board. But that's what employers are looking for. They're looking for the employee-employer match, and they're not finding that. And that's why the gap is so big. So like I said, academic qualifications are just the beginning. You need experience and you need adaptation, as well as in order to retain and be promoted in your job. So getting a job with just a 4-year degree is not going to, unfortunately, cut it anymore. So what are the challenges that graduates that the employers are facing? What are they saying about these graduates? What are the key things that have come out? Also, mapping with Dr. Webbstock, they're talking about the huge gap between what you are provided for in an academic classroom and what you needed to perform in real life situations. So there is some sort of gap. I know that a lot of universities have tried to be innovative, tried to find tools. Internship comes across quite profoundly, but internships are just not enough. They don't give you that sense that you're able to produce a product from point 1 to point B. And apparently, based on what employers are saying, they need at least 6 to 12 months to literally train a 4 to 3 degree individual within this industry so that they are performing optimally. And for them, that is expensive. So employers are saying that they're very challenged that the degreed individuals that are coming into the environment are expensive to train, whilst those that have experience are able to start immediately. So there we find again the conversation about, do you go for an academic qualification versus trying to instill yourself with some experience? And I think the answer is you need a hybrid of both. And I think it's really important that we find that. So basically, one of the challenges, the last challenge that they face is that there's an increasing demand for universities to produce industry-ready graduates. They just are not as ready to actually fulfill a meaningful task for the organization when they start. So what is the solution? Well, there are best practice case study that I want to speak to. This one is not from South Africa, it's from Australia. It's a university called Charles Sturt University. And they've adopted these strategies to really help close that gap. They found, interestingly enough, that a lot of the marketers, from digital marketers to branding strategists to creative strategists, were coming from the Americas, were coming from Europe, and were not coming natively from Australia. And they were worried about this. They did a survey and a research to find out what are the issues, why is this happening? And it really is a digital skills reason. They just, the products from the university were producing the content and the theory, so they were great leaders and strategists, but they were not great implementers. And in a marketing environment, in an ad environment, you actually need the people to do the work. And so what they did, interestingly enough, is that in the final year of all their graduates, they enforced them to actually spend one full 12 months period in their in-house agency. So they created a proper real-life marketing agency across disciplines and ensured that their last students, instead of going to find an internship, actually interacted with the real world. So they had clients from banks, clients from hospitals, clients from other academias that actually released and produced products that they could use on for their portfolios, which really helped them in exchange to get jobs in the market, because you're building a relationship, you've got those networks, but you actually know how to start from day one, how to write a brief, how to be creative, how to create an app. You really are starting from as a mature asset versus one that has to be ramped up and obviously spent. And they found that that's worked really, really well. And they are pioneering other sort of initiatives around how they can extend this not only to the marketing and advertising fraternity, because it's worked so well, but also to other disciplines within the university. And really the aim was to create work-ready graduates, and this was one of the interventions that they decided to go with. In marketing and specifically, employability really is largely now determined on the digital skills gap. As somebody who graduated 2 decades ago, certainly I cannot walk into an organization in 2021 and think that I will be employed as a marketing director without digital skills. What does that mean for recent graduates? It's actually a good thing, because you are in the age of technology, and that is actually the product that's being weighted for employability. So if you are a new graduate and you graduate within the next 3 years, obviously digital marketing is going to be important, because there actually is no marketing outside of digital marketing as a lead. So you'll still have your billboards, you'll still have your TV, but we really are moving more to online, and that's where the skills are needed, and that's what you need to do. And so the conundrum is often, I'm a graduate, I don't have the experience, where must I get the experience from? Because they want this digital experience. You no longer have the luxury as any graduate, but in particular, one that needs digital skills, to not create and find jobs in university. You have to find jobs whilst you are studying, also referenced by some of the insights that were found in Dr. Webstock's research. It overweights you versus any other candidate. So if you have a 4-year degree with no experience and no activity in university versus somebody with a 3-year PR degree with experience working at at the radio, working at a newspaper, they will get the job. Experience trumps academics if it's parity. If academics are parity, you both have the same academic qualification, your experience is going to trump the next candidate. So if you want to be employable in this industry, you have to find relevant and practical experience. Recruiters are also challenged in that they are trying to find these digitally sound sort of academics, but they don't have them. So that's a good thing for you if you are sitting in the audience and you are a marketing graduate and you are a PR graduate. It technically means that all you need to do is find yourself a computer, find yourself an online course that's free, and make sure that you, I've got 2 minutes, I'll rush it, and make sure that you actually upskill yourself. I'm going to really move to, I think this is important, and I want to speak to this about quickly, because if you're sitting there and you are a marketer and advertising individual, you want to know what then are the specific skills. You need to be somebody who is revenue driven, So you're not only thinking about your product, you're thinking, how am I using my skill set to make the company money? You need to know your customers. You need to create remarkable customer experiences. It's all about the experience now. Everybody remembers how you made them feel versus what you told them. You need to be great storytellers as well as being analytical, technological. It's a lot to ask, but it's things that you can learn within 4 months, 3 months, 6 months. It's not something that you have to take 3 years where you've already got your degree. So you have to upskill yourself. If you are not going to upskill yourself, you're not going to get a job. So the bottom line is that companies are telling recruiters that they need people who have a firm grasp of the current technology, who have the requisite leadership skills, and who are able to sell product. Marketers are looking for this experience and not knowing where to find it. Find it where you are. It doesn't matter what the menial job is at the moment. You have to make sure that you use your degree to actually show that you're able to provide solutions, innovations, in whatever environment you're in. It does not have to be a marketing specific environment, because that gives you the go ahead. And lastly, the new breed of marketers need to feel comfortable working as business leaders, working with the IT department, working with the sales department, working with the finance guy, because you are the business. Marketing, contrary to popular belief, is the business, because without marketing, there are no sales. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you so much, Zanele. That was just wonderful and very inspiring, and also speaks to the importance of what we are doing while we are studying. Many of the industries that provide internships are banking, engineering, and these are two of the industries that we're going to be hearing from our next two speakers. So our next speaker is Msizi Khoza, and he is the director at ABSA Investment Banking Division, where he supports clients across the continent to tap into local and international capital markets in order to meet their financial needs. He was previously the Chief of Staff to the ABSA Group CEO, and he has an MEng degree from UJ. Msizi, thank you so much for being with us today. We look forward to hearing from you and to learning from your experience. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Maria. It's a great pleasure to be here and to I suppose kind of interact with all of you guys, even though it is virtual, and I suppose kind of for me to share some of my experiences and insights. So what I'll try to do very briefly over the next 5 or 10 minutes is really to share my insights and my experience as regards specifically to graduate employability within financial services more broadly, and banking in particular. And I'll really attempt to do that in 2 parts. So the first is I'm going to maybe just kind of share, what I feel are sort of the big trends that are, disrupting and changing the face and the shape of the financial services sector. And then I'm going to pivot in the latter half to basically sharing some specific lessons and what I think are sort of some specific takeaways for the graduate who is either unemployed and looking to enter into financial services, or even indeed kind of the recent graduate who's recently been employed in financial services, whether through an internship or whatsoever. So that's going to really what I'm going to try and attempt to do in these next 5 to 10 minutes. So I mean, so what are some of the trends that we're seeing in financial services more broadly, and none of this stuff should really be surprising to anyone. And I'll sort of just rattle through some of them, and I'll come back in turn to maybe just further explain. So the first, I think, is really the big trend around digitalization and the platformification of banking, and I'll come back to explain what that means. And I think the second is basically what we see as the acceleration of TechFin and FinTech disruptions. And then finally, it's really, the change in the mix of the future banker, the banker of the 4th industrial revolution, as Professor Marwada likes to say. So if we sort of go back, right, if you think about digitalization and the platformification of banking, essentially, what that means is, we're seeing more and more the kind of banking as a service falling into a broader ecosystem, and it's essentially being driven by all these different advances in artificial intelligence that are allowing sort of not only just banks, but also other providers who are effectively intermediating kind of the core banking functions and presenting kind of a new or different face to the ultimate end user and consumer. And that kind of just gives you, highly customized customer experiences, linking your banking service into your broader lifestyle and ecosystem, and then of course kind of the other aspect which is driving this is obviously kind of your big tech players, looking to go into and providing banking services as almost the next frontier in sort of their social media and tech offerings. So almost you're trying to connect your social life with your banking needs, et cetera, et cetera. And what that does essentially is, as I mentioned earlier, it's intermediating kind of the core and the guts of a bank, i.e. being payments, being lending, being card acquiring, card issuing, and all of these things are effectively, almost the final leg, if you think about it, to the ultimate end user and consumer of all these products is basically being intermediated and being disrupted by somebody else. So I think that's kind of the first big trend to keep in mind. The second is really, as I mentioned earlier, the acceleration of fintech and techfin disruptions. And there's an important nuance in those two words. It's not that I'm just flipping them around because I'm a little bit nervous, but it's actually, there's a very distinct nuance between them, and happy to maybe go into it a bit later. But sort of all of that, right, is being sort of fueled by AI, artificial intelligence, and advances in not just AI, by the way, but also in computing power. Because no use having all the data if you don't then have the mechanics to basically crunch that data and be able to generate insights that then allow you to position the products that you're selling and the services that you're selling to the ultimate end user. And then I think the third point, or the big driver, the final big driver is just around the fact that, the banker of the fourth industrial revolution, the banker of the future, is actually less and less an accountant and more someone who is tech savvy. Yeah. And incidentally, the McKinsey Global Institute, MGI, recently released a report that said, 43% of total banking hours can basically be automated at present using currently available technologies, right? And so what you see is basically a shift in skills from basic cognitive functions that are, or a basic cognitive financially inclined skill set to more a skill set which is socioeconomic, technologically inclined. So less about relationships and sort of cost and profit excellence, and more around data science, robotics, AI, and the customer experience. So maybe, I mean, that's kind of maybe just gives you guys hopefully a bit of a sense in terms of, what are some of the big major drivers and trends that are shaping the financial services sector. So maybe let me almost pivot now to kind of some very practical insights as for somebody who's a fairly recent graduate. So of course, I'm not going to sort of then traverse the path in the ground which has already been so eloquently covered by my two colleagues around sort of the numbers that bear testament to the fact that graduate unemployment is such a big issue, and the fact that at present, I mean, in South Africa, you've got companies that are reducing headcount, that are instituting hiring freezes. So I'm not sort of going to go into that ground because I feel that's already tried. So, I'm sitting here in one of these hallowed halls of the University of Johannesburg. So I'm gonna basically take the liberty to almost use the pun, right? So sitting there listening to me on the other side, what is the exam question? And the exam question in my mind is, your challenge is, how do you make yourself a compelling candidate? Given everything that we know is happening, how do you make yourself the compelling candidate? And I believe there are kind of 3 or 4 big takeaways here. The first is, learning is a part of life. Yeah, so it's lifelong learning nowadays, right? I mean, I'm probably giving away my age now, Prof, but back in the day, my mom always used to say, no, don't study further, you're going to be overqualified. There's no such a thing anymore. So you've got to continuously learn. And I think that fits quite neatly into something that Zanele said earlier, which is around adaptability, right? So what you study is not what you become necessarily. Because I have a very fundamental view, and I'm very happy, Prof, that you also share this view, because you talked a little bit earlier about sort of the view of education is either utilitarian or kind of a little bit more generic. Because I've got a very fundamental view that what you go to learn at university is not necessarily the degree of being, a core communications executive, Zanele, but it's more the skill set to be able to identify a problem, to find a solution, to search the solution space, find the solution, and then to think about the most practical and efficient way to implement said solution. And that almost cuts across, if you think about it on that basis, it cuts across various sectors, it cuts across various verticals. It doesn't matter whether it's retail or it's financial services or it's mining or it's services, or whether, by the way, it's any of the verticals, whether it's operations, sales, marketing, risk, legal, compliance. It doesn't matter. Those skills are almost universal and they apply across the board. I think the other key takeaway is, for me, is experience, right? So experience is a critical tiebreaker. And what experience does is that it demonstrates to somebody else that you've got the ability to execute or to follow instructions. You've got the ability to be punctual and all the discipline that comes with that. And you're proactive and you're a go-getter. What you studied is almost irrelevant. Once a prospective employer knows those facts and you can demonstrate those facts, the rest becomes, by the by. Yeah, I mean, I know lots of investment bankers who are basically Bachelor of Arts and majored in linguistics, for an example, believe it or not. And then I think the final point around really is just around digital skills. So I sort of feel like, those are, if you're the prospective graduates, those are, really the almost the key practical nuggets of insight that I can share based on my own experience. I mean, I've spent almost a decade in finance and sort of related sectors, and as Prof. Marie mentioned earlier, I'm actually not a finance major. I did not study finance. I studied engineering, but it almost doesn't matter, because if you've got the ability to adapt, if you've got the ability to think, to problem solve, to search a solution space, to come up with the most effective and efficient solution, the rest you can almost just learn on the job, to be perfectly honest. So I think, those are just maybe the nuggets of insights that I wanted to share. And I think maybe just one final point before I hand over, Prof, is we mentioned earlier, we heard the presentation earlier about sort of the importance of entrepreneurship and graduates looking to go into entrepreneurship, and all of that is very valid, and I strongly support it. But even though that might be true, you cannot also then discount experience, because experience basically gives any potential backer and financier, it gives them the comfort that actually you've got the experience, you've got punctuality, you're able to solve problems, you're able to adapt, etc., etc., etc. So that's kind of just my my very short presentation, and thank you very much for your forbearance as well.
Msizi, thank you so much. That was also very interesting and insightful. I'm sure at this point you've got lots of questions for our speakers, so please post your questions in the chat. Our final speaker is Confidence Chillande, and she is a registered professional geotechnical engineer with a degree from UJ, and she now works at Zutari. She has worked in South Africa and in various countries in Africa, Malaysia, and Australia. She is passionate about mentoring younger peers from different backgrounds in the field of engineering. Confidence, thank you so much for being with us, and we look forward to hearing about your experiences and learning from you.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, and thanks to everyone for joining us this afternoon. A lot has been said already on employability, in different sectors. So my focus will be specifically on employability in the engineering field. So I'll give you a glimpse of my journey and how it relates that to what I'll be talking about with regards to employability. I'll speak about the future of engineering, then dive into employability in the engineering sector. So basically, I began my engineering journey at the UJ, where I got my BEng, and while doing that, I was involved with the UJ Civils and the Society of Women in Engineering and Technology. I had a bachelor with Oricon, wherein I then became a graduate engineer with them. Became involved with a lot of activities. I was a limelight chairperson, which is basically a forum for young engineers, and attended conferences, presented technical papers with the aim of growing my knowledge and expanding my knowledge in what I was doing on a day-to-day basis. While specializing with geotechnical engineering field, I decided to do my master's just to get deeper into an understanding of the geotechnical engineering space, and I've been sitting in the SAICI Geotechnical Engineering Board, as well as representing South Africa in the Young Members Presidential Group. In 2019, I registered as a professional engineer. The reason I had to give this bit of a background is just to give you a picture of how one can basically expand. As Msizi was saying, that being an engineer doesn't mean one is to focus on one thing, but one must have that broad adaptability to different scenarios and environment, especially relating to environment, relating to the latest trends in technology, and doing more research in what one is doing on a day-to-day basis. If we date back, we realized that a world was a very weird place without engineering. People couldn't fly, you couldn't drive to work. I mean, I don't know where you all will be sitting. We wouldn't be connected together in such a digital space if it was not for engineering. If you read the book by Prof Marada, Closing the Gap, you realize that we've moved for a very weird space, which I don't know how many of us would survive, to a very comfortable space that we're in. So basically that gives us a broad view of what engineering is about. We all understand that engineering basically is about using our scientific principle to design and build spaces, structures, tunnels, road and buildings. In simple words, if we didn't have engineers, I think you all would be sitting in bushes. But that is actually not enough if we're speaking of today, because we are now have moved into the 4IR. And what does that mean for us as graduates? What does that mean as the future engineers of such a revolving world? Is our degrees enough? I mean, we're speaking of what in the past we're just focusing on civil engineering, mechanical engineering, and electrical engineering. And if you look on the screen on my right hand side, you realize that we have evolved now into information technology, we have evolved into aeronautical, into automation. So that means that there has been a lot of changes that has been happening with changes that are happening in the engineering sector. So let's just take a step back in our understanding of employability. What do we understand by employability? Employability is just basically having that set skills, knowledge, and understanding, and having personal attributes that are required by a certain employer or required in a certain environment where you will need to be doing your day-to-day jobs. Your employability will basically depend on your knowledge. What is it that you know? And then your own skill, and how do you apply what you know already? And then lastly, your attitude. It's something that it's tend to look down upon, but we are realizing with time that employers are now even focusing on your attitude. What kind of attitude do you bring into a workspace? Because we have been hearing stories of toxic work environments when people tend to leave their different career spaces because of different attitudes that people bring into workspaces. So basically, in employability speaks of basically your innovation skills and your creativity. We speak of how determined and committed are you on your day-to-day basis, and how flexible and adaptable. I think the last speakers have spoken a lot about adaptability. And I think we've learned that now with COVID-19, how we all had to change the way we do things, how we all had to find ways of doing work. My task as a geotechnical engineer requires me to travel to different countries or different sites in order to study ground condition. And you may be asking yourself, how did we have to manage now with COVID-19? So employers are looking for people that will then come up with solutions to say, should all things fail, should there be a pandemic, should they close the borders, how are you then going to continue to do your day-to-day work? And that requires one who is then creative, is innovative, who then understand that we need not to be fixed in the things that we just learned in the classroom, but expand our knowledge in doing things differently. We speak about managing our time as anywhere else where we are. So that's one of the things that employers look at. We always under pressure to deliver things, and we ever have enough time to do our work. Thinking on your feet, being able to come up with solutions while you basically faced with challenges in a work environment. I guess there's a lot that we can speak about, criteria that employers would then look for in a well-rounded engineers. And that's just to mention a few things. So coming back to engineering, and I want us to just delve into employability in engineering. We all have seen the major changes that have happened in the engineering industry. In the past, we're just focusing on building structures, but now the 4RR, we're speaking of a space wherein data is the foundation and the network is the structure. Msizi already mentioned a lot, and I think it's because he's not just a finance person. He's got his engineering background, so I won't repeat a lot of things that is said, but looking at the speech that was given by our president, he spoke about building the smart cities. And the question is, are our engineers ready to take part into such a huge change in South Africa, wherein we're going to build smart cities? Do we have the right skills to play a role in building such a future in South Africa, and not just in South Africa, in the rest of the world? Because we're in a state wherein we cannot be left behind. We cannot be the group that then just stay behind in catching up in the technology. So the question that we should be asking ourselves is that with your engineering degree as it is, do you have then the relevant skills to take you to the next level? So now, when we look at our statistics in engineering, we've realized that we've been increasing the number of graduates, especially in the technology sector. We've been increasing our graduates in the technologist group. However, our professional registered engineers are still lacking. We're still lacking female engineers. We're still lacking engineers that can code and model. We still lack engineers that have a balance of social skills, finance, and politics. And moving into the engineering, into the future of engineering, we need a balanced engineer who, besides outside the skills of being a day-to-day engineer or day-to-day designer, one can easily maneuver around the different needs that we need. Because when speaking of building smart cities, we're talking about environments wherein we're more exposed to, like, let's say, a Tembisa. And looking into a Tembisa, one must be able to understand what are the social skills, what are the problems that were being faced by communities, and taking all of that knowledge and applying the technological advances and modeling and coding skills in order to build the smart cities that we're looking at in the future. So what is it that we need to be doing as graduates? We need to be first of all focusing on our practical experience. It is the exposure and the experience that we get on our day-to-day basis that help us to foresee how we could improve and do things better. The second thing that I believe is very crucial that as graduates we need to do is to ensure that we've got continuous personal development. As a graduate, your degree is not enough. Just gaining your qualification is not enough on a day-to-day basis. I mean, on a day like this, we need to be learning to code, because I mean, I graduated over 5 years ago. I did not learn coding, but what is it that's expected by my employer? My employer is sitting in a space wherein they're expecting me to start modeling to ensure that I understand better ways of modeling structures and coding and doing things in a way that I may not have learned in the classroom, but I must be able to learn very quickly in order to solve engineering problems that we see on a day-to-day basis. I already spoke about socioeconomic challenges. I cannot just be an engineer if I don't understand what's going on in the village. I mean, I've had stories of people that will go to villages and build infrastructures only to find that that's not what the village really needed. That is not what that community needed. That community needed a certain type of solution. And so as engineers, we must be adaptable. We must understand that we need to relate to the stories, to relate to the communities. And one more important thing is that we have found ourselves working in a space where as engineers, we shy away from the politics. It's something that we cannot run away from. In order to understand the problems that we're faced with, we need to understand that we need to understand the politics. We need to understand our day-to-day socio-economic problems. One more thing that we look down upon is our business intelligence, our finances. We cannot do much in engineering if we don't have money, if we don't understand the money, if we don't understand the business of engineering. So it's something that as engineers, we need to take initiative and ensure that we understand and we gain the right skills in understanding the finances of our day-to-day business that we do. And we've already spoke about 4IR. I mean, UJ is offering your introduction to coding. Those are the courses that we should be doing in order to find ourselves employable in the near future, in order to fit in the bigger future of the engineering world. So the last thing that I want to speak about is networking. Networking helps us grow our relationship with various sectors of engineering and not just stay in our bubble. So as a graduate, in order to find your space where yourself in a space where you grow into a well-rounded engineer, you must be able to network and relate with other engineers so that we can learn. I'll then close up with quote that a young engineer did say, mention that actually you are the driver of your career. You need to be proactive, be engaged, be open to learning, and be confident in everything you do. So thank you so much. I'm looking forward to engaging with your questions. Thank you. Over to you, Program Director.
Thank you so much, Confidence. And what a wonderful way to end, a reminder that we are all the drivers of our own careers. We come now to the questions and answer section of our discussion today, and our questions and answers are facilitated today by Prof. Boitumelo Diale. She is the president of the UJ Convocation and the head of Department of Educational Psychology in the Faculty of Education. She has published extensively on educational psychology and is a registered educational psychologist. Prof. Diale, I'm sure we've had many interesting questions that have been coming through on the chat, and I, for one, am looking forward to hearing some of these questions. Please do post your questions in the chat. We have got plenty of time to get to lots of questions, and we really want to interact with you. So, Prof. Diale, over to you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Maria, and welcome, my dear convocants. We are now going to go into the question and answer section. And I first want to thank you all as the president of the convocation for joining us into this conversation. This is our first conversation, and we are aware I need to declare as the president that we might have hiccups here and there, but we want to hear from you. What can we improve and what can we do better in the future? Because we really want to engage with you as the alumni and the convocants of the University of Johannesburg. Before I go on to the questions, some of the comments I have to say on the question section on the chat box, we have responded on as we went along, but there are those that I would want to pose to our panelists. Before I pose those questions to the panelists, I'm not going to summarize what my panelists have said, but I'm going to say one sentence that I've taken from each of them. From what our first speaker, Dr. Webstock, presented, I took the sentence, or I summarized it as understanding the trends in the market, or the importance of understanding the trends in the market. For us as graduates or aspiring graduates, how do we understand the trends in the market? And there are some questions already, Dr. Webstock, that are for you in terms of that I will come to. From our second speaker, Mrs. Zanele Modiba, I took this sentence and firstly, that there is need for us to understand that self-employability is a possibility. Getting a degree doesn't mean you need to be employed. And there was also a question that is posed around that. But what I liked from what you said, you posed an important question saying, we need to understand the challenge between being degreed and having experience. Maybe it's something we need to explore even in detail. Zanele, thank you so much. From Msizi Khoza, Mr. Msizi Khoza, I took one of the key things for me. My specialist as a psychologist is on career development, and that's what I do research on. And Msizi talked about the 21st century skills. The degree is one thing, but are we ready? Do we have the skills that the 21st century and the fourth industrial revolution actually needs? And he mentioned some of the few of those skills: critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, communication, being initiative, social skills. There are various skills that are key components of being work ready, whether you are employed or you are an employer or an entrepreneur. Those skills cut across the board that are important for us. So having said that, I want to go to a question that is now going to be to Dr. Webstock. Dr. Webstock, there is a question here. I'm going down the question. Okay. There's a question by Anonymous that says, is UJ engaging with employers to determine the skills set required for graduates to inform curriculum design? Otherwise, the qualifications become pointless and redundant. So is UJ actually engaging with employers to see that what we're teaching and our curriculum relevant to the world of work?
Thank you for that question. It's a little bit outside my province, but yes, I do know that our careers services do engage with employers. They have virtual fairs in which employers will express what they're looking for in their graduates. There are also parts of the questionnaires where there's a lot of emphasis on the attributes and the skills that employers are looking for, and they will rate those as the most important, etc. And I hear the same things that I'm hearing here: adaptability, digital skills, the ability to take initiative, to be able to think outside of your particular discipline area. Those are the things that employers are saying are valued. And we are seeing that from across the board, but also in the more particular industries, if you like, yeah.
And maybe following on that, there was an interesting question that came later on about the issue of employability. Let me get that question. It had to do with your presentation and the statistics and the data. And the question was, the data that we get is good enough, it's there, but then what? Are we collecting data for the sake of collecting data and reporting? What are we doing as I'm bringing it home now, what are we doing then from the data that has been collected that you've presented out there as the UJ? From there, where to? What are we doing with it to ensure that we support our alumni who are graduates?
Thank you. Yes, obviously, there is an element of the routine about doing surveys, but we do feed our data, first of all, into, and I might say at an institutional level, into our various performance indicators, which get tracked by the executive and by council. So we will look at those kinds of things. We will also split the survey data up into things that are relevant for particular faculties and drill down into particular qualifications so that they are aware of what the outcomes is. So it's not just a generic institutional level. Obviously, there are also parts, I mean, these are very complex surveys, so there are also parts that have to do with students responding on the career services and what they found useful and which were the most things, how did they hook up with employers, etc. So beyond the conversations about what should be in the curriculum, there's also those conversations about how do we increase the connections between students and employers.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Webstock. And that question, I think we will take it further as we say, this is the conversation for 2 hours. However, the conversation doesn't only stop here. These questions are going to be taken further in terms of our psych-ed offices for us to see what is it that you need as our graduates of the University of Johannesburg for us to be able to support you and to engage. The next question, I think I'm going to pose this next question to my 3 colleagues in the EXCO as the UJ graduates, because this is actually, they can give us more. The question is, what is the purpose of tertiary education? Do we produce graduates in order to be employees? Because it seems that everything we speak of graduates, we reduce them in employment seekers. And I think Zanele touched it in terms of self-employment. But I would like to hear the voice of each of my executive members. What is the purpose of tertiary education? And I think it's one of the questions that our youth out there is asking. Do we really need to go to university? What is the purpose? Do we have degrees in order for us to be employed or what? Maybe let me start with Zanele.
Thank you, Prof. Well, as an initial shot, I'd say the importance of a tertiary education really lies for me within embedding yourself in theoretical knowledge and global knowledge and broad knowledge in order to be able to act through your experience. An example I'll give is that when you are, for instance, a marketer and you're asked to produce a marketing brief, in university, you're actually taught the technical aspects about understanding why am I communicating this, who will I be communicating to, when will it be communicated, and how should it be communicated. Those are learned theoretical tactics that one has to practice so that they become professional, so they become proficient in what they're doing. But if you take that and take it into the workplace and your board of, your EXCO asks you, please can you detail what this data then means? How do we relate this data to our audience? You'll use then your experience through data collection, analytics, Google Analytics to be able to merge the two. You have to have a grounding of theoretical content to be able to articulate clearly and understand how the world operates and which sections of the world operate in different ways. And then also then you bring on your creative flair, your agility, your adaptability, your self-taught knowledge that Msizi was talking about. So academics for me are important are able to help you understand the field and the world in which you are governed in, and then your experience then is the tactical application of that. Almost like how marketing is the bigger, broader a tool of how to bring a product to market, and then advertising is the tactic of, are you going to be using this vehicle and this tool? When will it go? How will it go? When will it arrive there? And how will the experience be? So for me, it's really about the two. You have to have the theoretical embedded knowledge about what you're talking about and what it means in the world, and then having the technical experience on how to manifest it. And I think that's for me is how you merge the two, academic and experience.
Thank you, Zanele. Over to you, Msizi.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Prof. And I think it's a great question. And you know, and I 100% agree with what Zanele has just articulated, sort of the importance of the theoretical underpin. But you know, to bring this home a little bit, I remember way back when, even though I studied as an engineer, I only practiced for a very short period of time, and I was sort of trying to, I suppose, pivot away from engineering and to try and apply my skill set elsewhere. And as I was sort of in this process of transitioning, I had this hangover that, well, if I wanted to be, let's say, in finance, how on earth am I going to do finance if I've never, if I don't know what the top and the bottom of balance sheet looks like? And one of my mentors said to me that, a university degree, and basically he said, look, don't worry about all of that, because a university degree to any prospective employer, or by the way, a funder, and I'm going to get to that point just now, basically tells them, beyond the fact that you obviously have mastered the theoretical underpinning of whatever subject it is that you had studied or whatever major it is that you had pursued at university, but it tells them most importantly that 1, you can apply yourself, 2, you are disciplined, And 3, you've got grit and determination, because anybody who's ever done any degree program will tell you that there is one thing in common. And everybody says, well, you know, it's tough. You really have to apply yourself. You don't just go into the lecture room and wing it and expect that you're going to walk out of there in 3 years' time or 4 years' time with the degree, you know. And same applies in the postgraduate field. So I think, you know, we shouldn't be in this debate about the importance of tertiary education. We shouldn't lose the fact that beyond the theoretical underpinning, it's also an experience in building character and building self-discipline and demonstration that you can apply yourself. And I think, you know, the final point I would just want to make, Prof, on this point is that, you know, even if you look at all the black swans, right, the guys who created Facebook, the guys who created, you know, Twitter, Tesla, it's all the big companies that are out there, Google, or you know, think of any one of the big 4, the trillion dollar club, right? It's only the black swans who actually, you know, never went to university and they somehow managed to get to the other side and actually made a big success out of themselves. So although I don't have the data to hand, but it would be very interesting to see if you look at all the, you know, the billion-dollar unicorns, as they're called, all the companies in the world that make $1 billion or more, and even in South Africa, who make $1 billion or more in revenue, how many of those were started by funders who actually never set foot in a university? I guarantee you now that that number is very, very small. So yes, you could argue, well, you know, we shouldn't just, you know, of course, graduates should not just look only to being employed, but look to being employment creators themselves, right? But for me, you know, the two are not, Prof, mutually exclusive. The two are not mutually exclusive. You could still very much go to university, get the skill set, get the theoretical underpin in marketing and advertising or in engineering or whatever the case might be, and then use that skill set to then, you know, create employment yourself and become an employment creator. But it's also not true that you know, by not doing the one, automatically, you know, you can't do the other. So I think it's important in this debate that to realize and recognize that the two are not mutually exclusive.
Thank you, Msizi. I think what you've just said, actually, Mr. R earlier on posted and said, sometimes it's hard to start a company with just detail-orientated knowledge without experience in the industry. It could be easy for someone to work for 2 to 3 years in order for them to start their own companies so that they can create more job opportunities. And that's exactly, thank you, Mr. R, because you are speaking to exactly what Msizi is talking to now. And now I'm gonna hear what is then a confidence's perspective. By the way, confidence talked about, what I took from confidence is about understanding your context and community needs as we get into the world of work. Confidence, what is your take?
Thank you so much, Prof. It's very interesting because I need to answer this from an engineering perspective. There's absolutely no way you can do engineering without a degree. It's not because you cannot apply your mind, but it's just because you need the math and the science in order to solve the problem on a day-to-day basis. Yes, you may have your instinct to say, maybe it should be done this way, but at the end of the day, for you to know that you have applied enough safety in your design, in what you're building, it needs the measurements, it needs the math, and there's nowhere else where you can learn that besides from your basic education. However, that doesn't mean that you cannot be creative and be innovative outside what you've learned from the book. What it means is that even as you become innovative and creative in trying to apply your mind, at the end of the day, you need to still build something, and you cannot build something that you have not calculated, that you have not measured. I mean, if you sit in a building right now, somebody had to measure something. And how do you learn the measurements? You learn that on a day-to-day basis. I mean, on your skills that you have learned from the book. You learn how your bearing capacity. You learn to see how much will this building settle? What is the capacity that it can hold? All those type of things, you need to have learned them somewhere. It's interesting how when I started working, I realized I needed my textbooks next to me because I had to quickly think and still apply the principles. One of the things that have been questioned is around the use of softwares that have been becoming fashionable in industry. Does that mean we need to throw away the textbook if a software can still give me the results that it codes behind the scenes? And the truth of the matter is, for you to be able to use the software, you need to understand the principles that were used to build that software. You need to have a full understanding of the math and the science behind the software. So you don't just plug in the numbers without an understanding. You don't just put in as a software to calculate something that you don't understand. As a day-to-day, I mean, from day to day, on a day-to-day basis as an engineer, you need to understand that as much as there are softwares that seem to be replacing a lot of hard work that was done in the past, before you even get to use that, you need to understand what are the formulas that are using, what are the safeties that are being applied, because at the end of the day, we'll find ourselves in an era wherein people are using the technologies and the software without understanding. The next thing you see, a build is collapsed, a bridge has fallen. I mean, a building has fallen. Who are you going to blame if a building falls? It's only because somebody could have used a formula that they had, a software that did not have understood. Somebody missed a measurement on that. And honestly, in engineering, we cannot emphasize on the need for continuous learning. So that's why I kept on saying that even after learning your degree, you need to still learn on a day-to-day basis, not just learning, doing your own research. I remember on my first year working, I needed to do research almost every day on every problem to see how can I solve it differently, how can I solve it quickly, how can I solve it. So it's not just education as in degree, but it's education wherein you need to self-teach yourself every day. You need to read books beyond what you have just read in classroom. So honestly, I cannot emphasize the importance of education in the industry. It's a long story, and I believe you've got your answers.
Thank you so much, Confidence, saying that with the whole confidence behind it. It is interesting that you attend us. So you are saying to us now we need to understand that the falling buildings are not Mother Nature's problem. They are human errors that you engineers have done. So we now understand that very well and we'll take it up. Thank you, Confidence, for that. This question is for Zanele because it's about marketing. Zanele, there's a question from Tshilande, who's a UJ graduate and an account manager at Coca-Cola. Tshilande says, how does marketing graduates create and maintain their reputation within the field where there is so much role players already? And also, could we be sent this? Okay, the slides, yes, we will send and the recording, but the main question is, how does one really create their niche in this full area of marketing?
Thank you so much for that question. You know, I always get this question because marketing and communications and PR is often regarded as an industry that's very saturated, but you never hear doctors or dentists or nurses talk about how saturated the industries are and how are they going to compete within this industry and how are they going to survive. Every single career path has some form of saturation. And even amongst doctors, they'll say, GPs, this industry is saturated, but let me go to neuro. And the point is, I know that it's challenging, especially for new entrants, because people think that marketing and comms is a low-hanging fruit type of career. But the people that stand out actually are the ones that have the technical mastery, are the ones that have the experience, and the ones that actually work on those not typical skills. So one of the tools I use to get my head start in my Procter & Gamble, I used to work for Procter & Gamble, I used to work for JP Morgan Investment Bank, is to make sure that I have got a unique skill set that's not typical for marketers and communicators. And one of my great skills was being able to analyze data quickly and really tell a good story. So a lot of marketing right now speaks about how to be a good storyteller. It's about the story, it's about the connection. It's true, but how many people can tell it succinctly? How many times do you practice at Coca-Cola? How many times do you sit with your family and say, okay, this is gonna be my pitch at Expo? You have to find that one intrinsic skill set that is unique to you and then bring it to that environment. When I was at JP Morgan Investment Bank, I'm not an investment banker like Msizi, but I was able to make sure that I'm able to quickly analyze data so that if there are ums and ahs in that environment, I'm able to connect the data with the people through a story. So don't get bogged down by how many people in your industry, get bogged down by how you can stand out and be the alternative. Thank you.
Thank you, Zanele. There's a lot of questions around that have to do a lot with the survey that you presented, but I think we've been answering most of them as we go. But what is important for me that in summarizing these questions to ask a pure question, you know, in my world or generally in companies, we talk about what you pay as social responsibility. There's a percentage that companies pay towards social responsibility. How do we create social responsibility around companies in terms of graduate exposure to the world of work? A different form of social responsibility will still get the right term for it, whether it's employment responsibility, where companies are actually forced to take graduates and expose them to the world of work before they can be employed. Because we find a lot of students saying, I finished my degree, but I'm told about experience, or I'm even scared to start because I don't know where to start because I don't have any. So for me, I've got one person who is an employer herself. How do you get people like you who are employers? But two people who are in companies holding senior positions in terms of Zanele and confidence. How do we get the social responsibility of ensuring that our graduates get the exposure to the world of work? Okay, maybe let me start with Msizi.
Yeah, should I try maybe?
Yes.
Yeah. Look, I think, Prof, that's a really good question, and I think it's also, not only is it a good question, I think it's also a great challenge, right? And I think, you know, you do it, I suppose, through a combination of various instruments, you know, be it legislative, be it through the BE codes, be it through sort of the YES program, et cetera, et cetera. But I think for me, it's not so much the challenge of companies having a social responsibility, as you said, you know, to get graduates into the world of work. But also for me, it's not just a numbers game, but it's also about the quality of the experience. Mm-hmm. Because oftentimes with all of these programs, where some of these programs fall short, will be, you know, there was that initiative not so long ago. A company signed up, the YES initiative, where companies were pledging to put, you know, X number of graduates or students, you know, and take them on for a period of time, you know, 6, 12 months, whatever the case is. And that's all good and well, but it also doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help the company, and it doesn't help the graduate, most importantly, to have a graduate there, a young person, you know, who's done a 3 or a 4-year program, and then they sit in this office and they basically get asked, oh, please can you fetch the printing, you know, please can you go get us coffee, you know. Mm-hmm. it helps nobody. So it's about giving these young people, you know, and graduates who don't have the experience, but experience which is meaningful, experience which they can teach all the skills that we've been talking about this afternoon. You know, give them the experience to you know, demonstrate, you know, problem solving, demonstrate creativity, demonstrate critical thinking, initiative, being a go-getter, etc. Because those are then the building blocks that a graduate can then use, you know, when either they want to go somewhere else, or, by the way, when they want to maybe start their own business, to say, well, actually, when they speak to a potential financier or equity funder, to say, you know, you can back me because I have all of these experiences. I can demonstrate to you that I've been able to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's not, I think, the challenge is broader than give people, you know, get as many doors, get as many people through the door as you can. But it's about getting as many people through the door as you can to give them meaningful experience. And I mean, I don't think, Prof, that there is a silver bullet, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. But it is a challenge, and I think it's something that we need to just think we owe to ourselves to think very differently about. And to be frank, those who are in these very senior leadership positions in corporate South Africa should really look at themselves in the mirror and really think about this more broadly.
Thank you. Zanele, confidence, who wants to shoot on this, your opinions?
Well, mine is short. I don't know, maybe Confidence can end on this one. I do think that corporates and government have a responsibility of building some sort of graduate program or experience engine aggregator of resources and skills. I think EOH tried very recently to try to employ about, I think, 100 graduates per year and put them through real work situations. I think the bugbear with graduate programs is literally that, you know, academics are taken to do administrative work that's not related to what they want to learn and do. And so I think EOH and some other companies have tried to be quite smart about how can we give these individuals real life experience. And I think for me, if I was going to go the policy route, I'd really advocate for, you know, a 5-year experience engine across the board, industry specific aggregator of skill sets that are needed in corporate so that they can become ready for those corporates, almost like what Australia did in their own institution. I feel corporates should come together and say, fine, let's invest some money in campus, let's invest some money in some skill sets, let's invest some money in employing people, so generate employment from having those lecturers and give these individuals real life problems. Our graduates need to solve difficult problems. We are in some of these situations right now because we really are worried about, oh yes, like, do you know how to use a printer? Do you know how, did you log yourself in? Did you do the survey? No. We've got water challenges, we've got poverty, we've got inequality, we've got energy problems. Our graduates are smart, they're pliable, they're ready, they've just come from 4-year, 3-year degrees. They need to be solving hard problems, and government and corporate need to say, look, these are our problems, solve them. And in that way, give them real life experience to solving those problems so that they can become work ready when they get to work.
Thank you. Confidence, do you have anything to add on that?
My take is about taking initiative. I think when I close off my presentation, I spoke of being proactive. But being proactive, it's not just waking up and submitting an application for a job and saying that hopefully they'll take me. They say they needed 3 years experience, which I don't have. And by being proactive, I mean taking initiative where there are opportunities. And we tend to focus on one side of opportunities. There are things that we have seen in communities, such as volunteering for a certain program. And those are the skill sets that we usually take that we don't take them seriously, only to realize that they become so handy when we get employed, or rather when we get to that position where we need to start working. So when an employer speaks of experience, it's not just your professional experience, it's where you as an individual have been doing in the meantime as you were looking for that job. So we need to be very creative and be broad in making sure that we step out of our comfort zone. As Zanele says, there are community problems that we could get into the municipality and say, I see there is a challenges such as this. I'm not employed at the moment, but this is my solution, and I think I should volunteer and start providing solutions that I believe would basically help us in the near future to solve certain such problems. So what I'm saying is that let's not just sit back and expect somebody to give us something, but be proactive and reach out to gain the experience, because when we end up, by the time we build up your CV, let's say in 2 years' time, you realize that by those small deeds of volunteering, you have actually become a different engineer, or rather different person that you were the minute you walk out from the university. And it's not just in the community, even in the university itself, you probably are seeing problems that you believe you probably have solutions from. So start stepping into those avenues and see things that you can do as an individual while you need that experience, and you'd be surprised by how much knowledge you gain and how much experience you get just by being proactive and reaching out to gain such experience. So that's just my point on that.
Thank you so much, Confidence. I've got a question that I would probably first ask Doc to respond to, but I'm going to paraphrase it in terms of Melikaya, because I think it's a very important and generic question, and I want to ask you from a survey perspective. Melikaya has asked 2 questions, but the concern is around relevance of the degrees. Are the degrees that we are having relevant in terms of making them into coming into the world of work and being employable? Are there particular skills that need to be adjusted in terms of the current situation and the world of work there? You know, she's made an example that she's done a degree in public management and governance. Now she finds it hard to adjust with the skills that she has to use in starting a business or so. And I think this wraps up to the question of saying the importance of particular courses that need to be introduced around the board in terms of entrepreneurship and technology, ICT, across whatever qualification that is there. So maybe I'm asking this question from now a survey perspective that UJ takes. Do we go into looking at the undergraduates and trying to understand, to say, or the graduates, how relevant is what they have learned as they get into the world of work? They might be employed for that matter, but we still need to know how relevant is what they've done throughout their degree as they get into the world of work there, and what is it that they would think should change in the degrees?
Thank you for that question. It's a really important one. So what we see from the surveys, and I showed you that very quickly, is that most of our graduates are in fact employed for the area in which they studied, but some of them are not. And it's what Msizi was saying earlier. You can, as long as you are broadly educated, you can adapt and you can be within a different industry. It actually all comes back to the curriculum and what you did in it. So I'm hearing across the board here the importance of a broad understanding and being able to make connections. What Confidence was saying about understanding the social problems if you're an engineer, about making connections between the possibly quite narrow thing that you're studying and the broader questions and solving the problems that you need to do. So it comes back to the quality of education that you offer. I also saw a question there about entrepreneurship and how can we expect students to go and find jobs as well as do study, etc. Well, it has to be built into the curriculum, and we do have a lot of work-integrated learning. We can build in virtual internships if necessary. There's a lot that can be done, but it's about the questioning kind of nature of education that you're inculcating. It's about getting your students to think more broadly than their area. And I mean, I'm pleased that UJ has done some things in that area. So, for example, all the first years doing the Africa Insights course. We saw, for example, we had a number of, I think it was some, Maria, you'll know this better than I, some 10,000 Coursera licenses. And what did our students do? If they were tourism students, they went and learnt about 4R stuff or about coding and so on, broadening and making those connections. You know, I had a conversation with somebody I know who is an actuarial scientist, very smart, the other day, and she said, the problem for me is that I studied something so narrow and so specific that I forgot to do the important things like learning coding. And now I want to be a data scientist and I want to switch, but I had to pretty much go back to the beginning. So again, coming back to UJ, it's important that we have across the board courses like the artificial intelligence course. It's that we have the extra Coursera kinds of courses and so on, and that we build in the problem solving skills into whatever curriculum we're doing. I think that actually goes a long way to making potentially UJ graduates employable. I just want to return to something that Msizi said. So yes, there are a whole lot of startups and big multi-billion dollar corporations, etc., that were started by people who didn't go to university. They had the drive, they had the insight, they had the energy, but they also employ people who had degrees to go and do very specific things within their company, as long as they can understand those same attributes in those people that they hire.
Thank you so much, Dr. Webstock. Our time is running out, and you know there's interesting conversations taking place here. But I think from what you're saying, I just want to remind our alumni that we've got two very interesting courses that we are offering free of charge that you can do as an alumni of the University of Johannesburg, and Dr. Webbstock has actually referred to them. The first one is the Africa Insights, and the second one is the Artificial Intelligence. Those courses are free of charge. Register as an alumni of the University of Johannesburg. You'll find it on our website, UJ website. Go to alumni and you can register. You can do those courses free of charge. And it is important to look at it. But just in 2 minutes, Dr. Webstock, what is currently our stance? I know we do this survey in terms of employer satisfaction of our graduates. Do we have any knowledge at this stage? Where do we stand in terms of the employer satisfaction in terms of our UJ graduates?
I think from what we've seen from the independent surveys that we've done, that it's generally a bit higher than average, and that's very pleasing. In our own surveys, I think the last one we did was in 2019, we didn't have a lot of employer participation in that. I think we had something like 67 employers. And they were pointing to the kinds of attributes that the kinds of things that we've been talking about. And they did indeed find those in our graduates. But we also saw, I think in one of the slides that I showed, that many of them are pointing to a gap between, and in general, not necessarily about UJ, a gap between the kinds of skills and attributes that graduates are coming out with and what they're actually looking for, which is some of the things that we have been talking about here and that Msizi was highlighting earlier.
Thank you so much. As we begin to wrap up, I've got a comment here by Muname Tlotleng who says, you must check out graduate in training program we offer at the CSIR. It is the best I can say. Muname, I would really love to get in touch with you so that we actually highlight that in our alumni magazine and our alumni website so that our graduates can actually know where to go and how to find this course. Please drop us an email at ujconvocation@uj.ac.za. I repeat the email, ujconvocation@uj.ac.za. Would really want to engage with you in terms of that. Thank you so much. We sort of have come to the end of our questions and we've tried to cover as many questions as we can. I know there are some of the questions that were said, or some of the comments that were said earlier on. There was a comment, let me go back to that comment. There was a comment by one of our convocants here that spoke about, I'm trying to check that now. Okay, there was a comment or question by the around the UJ Technology Transfers Office. We are not ignoring what you've written. We've seen your comment. We will take it up because there is no person in the panel now who can answer that because they were not part of the program. But we promise you, please drop us so that we know who exactly we should respond to. Drop us an email at the email address that I have said so that we can address the issue that you've questioned about UJ Technology Transfer Office and your query that you have. Thank you so much. We're now having the last 11 minutes to wrap this. I want to give 2 minutes to each of the panel members to say their closing comments and as we begin to wrap up. I will start with Dr. Webstock. Dr. Webstock, your last 2 minutes comment to our audience.
I think what I found interesting in the discussion today was the extent to which the real life experiences of people in particular industries resonated with some of those trends that I was talking about right at the beginning. So I'm finding that really important, the shift from inputs, as I was saying, to actually having people who are able to adapt, go out there, solve real world problems, understand them in a broader context and in their particular disciplines, be adaptable. And I think one thing I heard across all of them actually is actually the future is digital. So we have to build it into our curriculum, whether it's in finance or in tourism or whatever. And for me, that is a very important takeaway from the conversation today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Webstock, and thank you for being our guest today and engaging with us as the executive of the convocation. Zanele, your last comments?
Thank you, Prof. I think for me, my most important takeout or advice or comment to our graduates and aspirant employees or even employers is engagement. I think you really have to buckle down and get engaged with every facet and aspect of your life and the world out there. I think it's important to note that you've got this qualification and you might not be getting a job, and it's frustrating when people say, go out there, be innovative. But it literally means having a microscopic view of what's around you and available and a macroscopic view of what's around you and available, and get your hands dirty. speak to people, engage with people. Don't just write emails, confront people, go to offices, go to individuals, get engaged in the nitty-gritty of life. I think we've said a lot of things about skills and digital and experience and everything, but the bottom line is get yourself involved in your environment. And I think once you start getting involved, you'll have a clearer understanding of what you need, what you know, and what you don't know, and that will get you going. So don't be discouraged, get involved.
Thank you so much, Zanele. Get involved. Get your hands dirty. Msizi?
Yeah, I think my final comment, Prof, to the colleagues who've joined us is, the future is digital. It's not okay not to be able to write a line of code anymore. That's just the reality of the times we live in. If you don't know, there's all kinds of online programs that teach you. Skills are applicable across sectors. So don't sort of have a tunnel vision. In other words, but think very broadly. Because skills are transferable across the board. And then finally, to Zanele's point, get the bit between the teeth, as the Australians say. So kind of get out there. They say power concedes nothing without struggle. So it's not just going to come. You have to go out there and get it. That's for me my parting shot, Prof.
Unless you get out there and get it, you're not gonna make it. One of the singers said, "Uzoyithola kanjani uhlele khoneni." So get out of that corner and go and get it. Confidence. Your last words.
Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I think my biggest message out there is to remain proactive. And I think, as Stephen Hawking says, is that intelligence is the ability to adapt to change. We have all learned from COVID-19 that the world is changing, and if we remain stagnant, we are not going to get much out of our stagnancy. So our ability to be proactive in our learning, in the way we engage with society, in the way we grooming ourselves, in the way we grooming our attitude as we present ourselves to the world. So my message is that let's be proactive in everything that we do, and we realize that UJ did indeed produce the best graduates out there. We can raise the orange flag and be the best that we want to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Confidence. The only stagnant object or the only stagnant human being is a dead human being. So if you are still alive and you are part of us here, you cannot afford to be stagnant. Let us go on, let us change. Change is inevitable. We are seeing that we are going to the new normal. Let us adapt to the new normal. Dear convocants and alumni, it's really been a pleasure being with all of you here. I want to invite you once more to join us as the alumni using our UJ Alumni Connect at www.ujalumni.co.za. The email is there in our chats. We say to you, we promise you that we will give you the presentations that were done today and the recording that was done today for you to engage with us. We would like to also hear from you. What is it that you want us to engage with you in the future? What are the topics that you want us to take up with you as our convocants? We are really looking forward, as the executive of the University of Johannesburg Convocation, that you are engaging with us. Thank you to my presenters here, our executive director that is here, Dr. Webstock. Thank you for joining us. And to my executive members, as always. Zanele, thank you so much. Msizi, thank you so much. And Confidence, thank you so much. Let us keep on keeping on. Let us drive this convocation office with pride and dignity. Thank you so much, convocants. I'm giving back to Dr. Maria for a closing comment.
Thank you so much. One of my closing comments is listening to what everybody's been saying today. I think we should be putting a challenge out to government and to big business and to corporates. Why do they not become a bit more like law firms, accounting firms, and the medical industry? These three industries work with the idea of learning on the job. So the first 2 years that you are a lawyer, you work as an article clerk. You come into the job with theory, and you're given 2 years to learn the practice of law. And we should be having much more of that kind of approach to how people enter into the business world and how people enter into the government. I would also like to say a big thank you to everybody who's participated today. It's been fascinating and interesting, and like everyone at home, I have learned a lot. We'd also like to say a very big thank you to our Convocation committee for this wonderful initiative and putting all of this together. And then a big thank you to the Alumni Office for organizing and hosting this session, and also to our technical team in the background who've made all of this possible. Thank you most of all to all of you who have participated. Thank you for your wonderful questions, and thank you for such an engaging session. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Stay well and stay safe.